Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX14 Walsh and welcome to an all new World of Warships gameplay. In this episode I'll be sailing out in the Tier 9 Japanese cruiser known as the Ibuki in a Tier 10 domination match on the map Shards. Having recently acquired the Ibuki, the purpose of this video is for me to outline my first impressions of the ship. In the gameplay shown, I've mounted all of the modules by the upgraded torpedo module. As I analyse the gameplay, I'd like to draw your attention to two main areas of discussion. Firstly, long range. In the opening half of the match, I intend to use the great range on the Ibuki's main batteries to rain high explosive or HE on the enemy battleships, burning them down. Secondly, value of concealment. When appropriate, I plan to use the Ibuki's strong concealment to get close to objectives, giving me the potential to surprise my opponents. With the forward covered, let us get into the gameplay. As we load into the match and look at the team sheets, we can see that both teams have 4 battleships, and in the case of the enemy team, all their battleships have main guns which have calibers in excess of 358mm, and this is important for the survivability of our ship. Because with the upgraded hull, the Ibuki is covered in primarily 25mm plating, albeit there are a couple 32mm plate sections on the main deck, but these are few and far between. So if we say it's covered entirely in 25mm plating, then we'll get the picture that this plating is going to be overmatched, applying the 14.3 multiplier rule, by gun shells, i.e. armour piercing shells or AP, which has a calibre in excess of 358mm. And this means that when we do take these hits, there is a very good chance these shells are going to go through the armour into the citadel and citadel the ship hard. And we'll be losing a good chunk of our 39,000 HP, say a third at a time, and it means we cannot take too many hits, and with the ability to only repair, if I remember correctly, while repair party consumable 10% of all citadel damage, we're not going to be repairing much of that. It's not going to buff out very well. So instead, to mitigate this, we need to prove elusive and we need to stick to longer ranges where battleships are not going to be as accurate, despite their high sigma values, particularly 2.1 in the case of the Tier 10 Yamato in the Japanese battleship line. Now we can do this because we can build the Ibuki for longer ranges, particularly with the gunfire system modification 2 in the upgrade slots, where we can kick the range of our main batteries, the twin 8-inch batteries, all the way out to 19.2 kilometers. We could push this out even further through the application of the spotting plane consumable, but with there being a large number of carriers in the queue at the moment due to the CV rework, I've stuck with the catapult fighter consumable, so that way I've got the ability to deal with those carrier matches. But it's no problem, because with 19.2 kilometers range, we're putting battleships towards the more extreme ranges where they've really got to be accurate of every salvo fired and they can't afford to throw those salvos away, whereas we can keep raining down high explosive shells in particular. And we have to consider that these guns are going to be very consistent for us now, simply because they are the same guns that we've been using since Tier 5 of the Furitaka. The same 8-inch guns, albeit we've just got more of them over time. And now having 5 twin turrets, so 10 guns in all, we're able to rain down every 13.7 seconds a salvo, and with the high explosive alpha damage per shell being a maximum of 3,300, you'll get decent damage per every high explosive penetration, sound the superstructure of a battleship, and with a fire chance of 19%, adding in Demolition Expert on your captain here, and that gives us the ability to deal that raw damage and also set a good number of fires, and that means we can bleed down the health of an enemy battleship rather rapidly in these longer to extreme range engagements. Now that initial muzzle velocity of 840 meters per second, if applied to the more extreme ranges, so 16 kilometers plus, is not too difficult to get used to, because with the Mogami at Tier 8 we had a maximum range of 15.7 kilometers, and the 8-inch guns work well all the way out to that maximum range, so taking them a couple of kilometers further is not too much of a problem, particularly against the larger size, less manoeuvrable battleships compared to the more nimble cruisers that you're going to bump into. But with your main opponent in these longer range engagements being a battleship, that means you have the advantage, because whilst you don't have the armour, you have the higher fire rate and you are the sleeker, more manoeuvrable ship. As we move into Charlie Hill, the enemy team seemingly abandoning Charlie thanks to the intelligence provided to us by our gearing, and we're going to move in to speed up and finish off the capture process. Let's talk a little bit about our ability to be manoeuvrable and kite away from the incoming fire of a battleship. We have a top speed of standard of 35 knots, a turn circle radius of 770 meters, and a rudder shift time of 5.8 seconds as conferred to us from the upgraded hull, plus the steering gear modification too. We are not using the additional steering gear modification to improve this even further, as we've gone for the Concealment mod instead. But still, 5.8 seconds is more than enough when we're sticking to these longer range engagements. We will every so often take hits, but they should be minimalised. And that means that we have the ability to continuously wiggle our aft and avoid the incoming fire. And we have a prime example here, what the enemy Amagi, the Tier 8 Japanese battleship, being left alone heading towards Objective Charlie, and at these distances are closing to at most 13 kilometers, we can be very evasive, we can use a little bit of throttle control and frustrate their aim. Now, one thing to note in return, and perhaps a weakness of the Ibuki, is the fact that we are having to give a lot of broadside wind going forward towards our target in order to use all 10 guns on the target. And this poses a threat in the fact that we are exposing our broadside right now, but at the same time what we can also use this to do is bait incoming fire. Because as we're now turning away, the Amagi may open fire with their guns, armor piercing shells on the way, and we can turn away and cut our speed to avoid the incoming shells and cause them frustration. And it means now that Amagi is going to start to enter a world whereby we're scoring a consistent number of hits, 2 more penetrations in a fire set, and they're dealing no damage whatsoever. And they've instantly used their damage control party consumable to put out a single fire, so now we're going to make them pay. What would the duration of that consumable being only 5 seconds in the case of Japanese battleships, if I remember correctly. And we'll keep scoring the hits, and over time, because it's going to take a lot of time for the Amagi to leave our gun range, and we can see here in the reverse situation, reverse angling towards the Amagi, we have the better turret angles on them and can bring all 10 guns to bear. We can consistently hit the target, we set another fire there, and they can't put this fire out, and we're supporting our Yamato now, who's taking the majority of the attention off the Amagi, and we can just gradually burn them down. And this is a brilliant situation to be in. We've got the space to operate in such a fashion where we can continuously rain down the fire, we can accurately do so thanks to the dispersion at max range of 148 meters, that being conferred to us by the Japanese accuracy, plus aiming systems modification 1 in the upgrade slot, and we can just be an absolute problem. Because if that Amagi wants to get us out of the game, they're going to need to get the perfect salvo, or alternatively, we're going to need the mistake of not manoeuvring our ship and just sitting still and letting the Amagi punish us for it. And in return, they're also taking damage from our Yamato, and that damage is not going to be able to repair as easily, with all fire damage being 100% repairable, if I remember correctly, so the Amagi can repair our damage over time, but it puts them in the difficult situation where they're going to have to use their consumables up to mitigate this ongoing bleed damage, particularly until they get their next instance of damage control party. And it looks as though their fires have gone out once again, perhaps they had damage control party available, we would assume so. So how about this, we have 2 fires on the enemy ship, let's set some more. Because as the shells come roaring in at this point, we can consistently hit the target, and there's another 2 fires. There you go. Now, whilst this is all happening, one thing you do have to keep in mind is you can become target locked. And this is where you're focusing so heavily on burning down one enemy ship that you're not looking around to see what's going on. And priority target, a captain's skill, is very good at giving you intel on when you're perhaps being targeted by another enemy ship, not just the one that you're frustrating. Now here, fortunately, the Amagi is by itself, so we're not going to receive any potential counterfire from other ships on the enemy team. But it's something to keep in mind, that if you focus so heavily on bringing one ship down, it can cost you your ship, because you're so engrossed in bringing one down, you suddenly get hit at long distance by another ship who knows how to lead you, because you're becoming predictable to them, not the person you're engaging. But nonetheless, we take the Amagi out of the game, that's our first kill, and that's just shy of 48,000 damage dealt, with 4 fires and a load of high explosive shells going in. Now at this point, as we make our way forward, we're going to go after an Alaska and a Henry IV. Now what's important here is we're starting to engage enemy cruisers, and these ships are relatively quick. It may be the case that in the Alaska in particular, they're not as fast as us, with our top speed of 35 knots, perhaps outweighing their speed a little bit, but in the case of the Henry IV, what with their speed boost considerable, they'll definitely be faster. And what this means is we're now going up against our own ship class, which can kite away from us and enter this weird stalemate of kiting back and forth, which we cannot afford to get engrossed in. So instead, we're going to apply another strength of the Ibuki, and something I've also built the ship for, and that is maximum concealment. With detectability by sea in open water of 9.9 kilometers, by air 5.8 kilometers, and when smoke firing of 7.2 kilometers by sea, this means that you have the ability to get very close to objectives or get very close to the front line before you are spotted. And this means you can get close enough to surprise enemy destroyers. Albeit if they're playing in open water, they're going to see you before you see them, unless it's something along the lines of a Kavaros, the Tier 10 Russian gunboat destroyer. But I digress. The importance of this is the fact that you can move about in open water, and in this instance we have the ability to close the distance to the enemy Alaska and the enemy Henry IV. If they decide to turn towards us, we would see them well before they're going to see us, and we can react accordingly. And that gives us an advantage in being able to control the situation and control the initiative of the engagement. Now here, our two opponents are going to be continuously running away. So what we're going to do every so often when we get a bit closer to the Alaska in particular, we're going to harass them a little bit and try to set some fires or just deal some raw penetration damage to bleed off their health and also keep them spotted for our allies where possible. Albeit they seem to be doing it for themselves, while Yamato having a field day here trying to do a bit of target practice. But as we continue to make our way forward here, we see we have to angle significantly in order to bring out the rear ship and bring the two rear guns to bear. But then we start trying towards the target once again. We can push them further and further away from the centre, and we're not going to become engrossed in continuously shooting at these guys or getting stuck in this engagement, because there's more important fish to fry, and those will be around Objective Bravo, because Objective Charlie is practically secure for the time being and nobody's going that way, or at least not that we can see, albeit the enemy destroyers may go that way a little bit later on if they decide to be stealthy. At this point we can see the Alaska is just going to keep pushing towards the very southern border of the map, so instead we're going to stop firing and we're going to go to our concealment. And what's important is the firing rate of your guns of 13.7 seconds as a reload combines very well with the core game mechanic of ships becoming less visible after 20 seconds from firing. Keep in mind, for those who are new here, after you fire your guns, your concealment drops, and it drops to the point that if you fired and you were spotted, you'll be spotted all the way out to the firing range of your guns. After 20 seconds, your ship will reset to its base concealment. So in this case, if we're spotted after firing, our concealment will drop to the point we're spotted at sea all the way out to 19.2 kilometers, but after 20 seconds has expired and we haven't fired our guns again, our concealment will return to 9.9 kilometers. Now this harmonises incredibly well, I would argue, with that 13.7 second reload, and the fact that if you say 13.7 seconds, call it 14 seconds. After you fired your guns once, you know, right, if you want to go to your concealment, you've got to wait for your guns to reload anyway, and they're 14 seconds, so a further 6 seconds doesn't feel that frustrating to have to wait before you're fully concealed. Whereas if you're playing something along the lines of the American heavy cruisers, so let's take the most extreme example, the Des Moines at Tier 10, you have a 6 second reload, so you're encouraged more and more to keep firing, or you feel as though you're trapped in that cycle of continuously firing, rather than stopping firing and going to your concealment, because you've got such a fast reload and you don't want to get caught out in the fight. So here you have the ability to train your ability to be patient on your guns, to know when not to fire anymore. And with this Henry IV pushing in, we try to set them on fire, and we did so with a high explosive. They've turned broadside, so we throw a load of armour piercing in. Unfortunately, we just fired it a little too early before they gave us an extensive broadside, or perhaps they never really gave us that broadside, because it looks as though they've turned back towards us, or at least back towards our allies with their nose, and that goes to show that the armour piercing isn't as potent as, say, your Tier 9 American heavy cruiser counterpart with the improved penetration angles, but the armour piercing can do some damage, as we saw there, or its ability to citadel for 4,700. So you shouldn't just rely purely on the HE shells, armour piercing shells can also be valuable every so often. But now coming back to the situation at hand, we're focusing on the Henry IV from earlier, and we can see they're given a more extensive broadside here. So we've thrown our first high explosive salvo, dealing a good amount of strike damage there, 6 penetrations, 1 non-penetration, and now we switch to the armour piercing here to try and get some nasty meaty penetrations, but unfortunately we're not going to be too successful. As we can see, we get 6 penetrations and 3 over penetrations, but really we were hoping for 1 or 2 citadels. But still, just shy of 9,000 damage in that salvo, it's some health which the Henry's going to struggle to get back, compared to what it could have been. We do fortunately get hit by high explosive from the enemy Conqueror, not armour piercing, but that goes to show you how, if you overextend into a position and you're rather aggressive, and you're not paying attention to where the enemy battleships are, then you can be caught out, and there we were fortunate not to be caught out by armour piercing shells, so fortune was on our side. Now in return, by being this close to the objective, let's come back to the concept of concealment. We push far forward, and now we're starting to take a good amount of damage, and it's time for us to retreat. Now the one thing the Ibuki does have going in its favour in terms of retreating, not only does it have its speed and its concealment, but it also has some wonderful torpedoes. Now these are the stock torpedoes here, which don't differ too much from the fully upgraded torpedoes. They've got the same range of 10 kilometers. The only difference is their speed here is 62 knots, in the upgraded case it's 67 knots. Quick bit of logic just to intervene. I'm putting up a catapult fighter here because I know the Alaska is coming towards me from what would be, from their perspective, the island being on their port side, so starboard side here. And I want to use my catapult fighter to tell me when the Alaska's coming, because the catapult fighter is going to fly into the Alaska's AA range, which I'm assuming is going to be 5.8 kilometers over time, and that's what I'm expecting. So as the Alaska keeps on pushing forward, They're going to be spotted by their AA firing, if not my allies shooting at them and then returning fire. And as they keep on coming forward here, I shoot at them to bait them to give broadside to take a shot at me. They throw a load of high explosive, but unfortunately they're not manoeuvrable enough to dodge the torpedoes that have suddenly appeared in front of them, being detected at 1.6 kilometers. That's 2 torpedo hits and another ship dead in the water. And keep in mind the stock torpedoes will hit for a maximum damage of 17,233, the upgraded ones hit even harder, but the downside is your reload goes from 101 seconds as shown here to significantly higher. I think it's 111 seconds, don't quote me on that. You have 2 quadruple sets to either side of the ship. The only frustration you are going to have with these sets is they're in a raider configuration, but you'll be used to this from the Mogami. They're towards the rear of the ship, and they only have firing angles towards the rear. They don't have forward firing angles whatsoever. And we saw that straight at the start of the game when I was experimenting with the fact that I'd only just got the upgraded hull in this game. Now looking at this Henry IV here, we threw a load of armour piercing in once again, and we've got some penetrating hit, but nothing major unfortunately, no citadels once again. But still, it's good damage and it shows that the armour piercing potential is there in the right circumstances. They throw their armour piercing in, but note how we played out on the throttle there to make sure that they would, well, the intention of them overextending their shot, providing too much lead, and now we'll switch back to high explosive to finish them off when we get a clean shot on target. And we're playing in and out of the objective because remember, we have the concealment to play in and out of the objective. We dodge their torpedoes, we guess they'd be throwing some torpedoes down from their single triple set. Dodge those easily, and now we move in towards them. And what we can see here is against guns that are lower than 358mm in caliber, we can, through effective angling, mitigate a good amount of the armour piercing damage that comes our way and just absorb high explosive damage. But there is one thing you have to keep in mind. Your damage per minute, or your effective damage per minute, is going to be lower than that of a good number of opponents because you have the slower reload rate. So you can't necessarily afford to get caught up in those engagements at say 5 kilometers or less where you're just trading shells back and forth as we kill off the Henry IV there, and that's going to conclude the game. Well, the Shimakaze on the enemy team have made their way gradually towards Charlie, but they're a long way away from Charlie. As we can look at the points, it's practically over. So just keep in mind, trading engagements aren't always going to be that effective in the long term at close ranges. But time for the post-game stats. Having been victorious, we can see that our battle performance amounted to a total damage output of 132,367 HP. Moving on to the team scores, we can see that we placed top of our team in terms of base experience earned with 1,981. To understand our role over the course of this match, I would argue that one must appreciate how fragile the Ibuki is against larger caliber guns. With most of our outer armour being 25mm thick, this exposes the ship to being overmatched by the guns which the majority of our battleship class opposition possess. As a result, we started off by supporting a friendly destroyer and taking objective Charlie. With the enemy not contesting the objective, this allowed us to push into the objective and begin the gradual process of burning down the enemy Amagi, the Tier 8 Japanese battleship. By using the range of our guns and our fast shifting rudder, we were able to prove evasive whilst at the same time scoring regular hits, setting subsequent fires. Once the Amagi had been eliminated, we had the opportunity to be more aggressive as the rest of the enemy's battleships were situated on the western side of the map. This aggression materialised in a push towards Objective Bravo, where we could use our concealment to get close to the objective before opening fire on the enemy cruisers situated close by, particularly the 2 Henry IVs, the Tier 10 French cruisers. Note, with the gun calibers of the cruisers being well below the overmatch threshold, we did not feel as threatened by their return fire, having the confidence in our ability to angle our ship to mitigate incoming damage, particularly from armour-piercing shells. Moreover, if at any point we did feel the pressure from the enemy was too strong, we always had the ability to return to our concealment, turn away and pull distance thanks to our top speed. We used this to great effect against the enemy Alaska, the Tier 9 American 3XP premium cruiser, bringing them down with our hard-hitting torpedoes in the process. As for our detailed report, we have one key item to note with regards to the modules of our ship which were damaged over the course of the game. We can see that our torpedo tubes were knocked out 4 times. In general, this reflects my finding that the torpedo tubes on the Ibuki are quite vulnerable to being knocked out on a regular basis, sometimes multiple tubes being knocked out by a single salvo. Whilst this did not compromise our game plan here, it has in the past caused me some difficulty when I've been about to drop torpedoes just to have them knocked out. I've then had to either use my damage control party consumable to repair them quickly, leaving the ship vulnerable to other module damage or fire/flooding, or accept I can no longer use them, I have damage control parties not available, or the tubes have been damaged during a reload, resetting their reload timer for the given situation. Finally, coming on to credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we took away 347,752 silver credits and 50,446 commander experience. In conclusion, as far as first impressions go, I feel that the Ibuki is a challenging cruiser which requires her captain to respect her fragility when considering how best to deploy her over the course of a match. For the build I am using, the long range of our 8-inch batteries can be used to great effect in combination with our hard hitting high explosive shells to annoy larger ships, particularly battleships at extreme ranges. This annoyance materialising through the shell's high fire chance, which will gradually cause the targets to burn to death. When experiencing return fire, the combination of her speed and rudder shift enables her to dodge the majority of the incoming damage, and if needs be, she can always retreat to her comfortable concealment. However, once the large caliber guns of enemy battleships have been removed from the area of engagement, thereby removing the threat of armour piercing overmatches, I feel the Ibuki can be used in a more aggressive manner. This being due to her concealment giving her the ability to get closer to the front line than most heavy cruisers before she is spotted. With the appropriate angling, she can take on enemy cruisers and deal considerable damage with both her high explosive and armour piercing shells. If the close range engagements do get too much for her, she can always retreat and use her torpedoes to cripple her pursuers. The challenge in my opinion is knowing when to make the switch between using her for long range harassment versus getting up close with the enemy. With that, I've been TX141. If you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. Additionally, if you do not currently play World of Warships but are thinking of now giving this highly enjoyable game a try, you can always sign up today using the link in the video description. Alas, that is all I've got time for today, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, as always, I bid you fair winds and following seas.